The Tascam Model 12. It's been out for a couple years now, and I've personally had experience with it for about 3 months or so. So I figured in this video I want to give a quick discussion, kind of overview, maybe review-ish type of thing about my thoughts on the Model 12. So for the past 3 months, we've been using it off and on for various jams and recordings and that type of stuff, and it's been really great. I've actually really appreciated the workflow that the Model 12 has opened up. Now, it does not replace my mixing setup. It doesn't replace Ableton, obviously. It's not a DAW suddenly that has all the bells and whistles. It is extremely limited when you compare it to an actual computer setup, but in terms of an interface and recording setup, it actually fits the bill incredibly well. And I do want to point out right away that I don't have experience with using it as a control surface for a DAW. So if you're looking for information on that or experience from that in this video, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to be talking about that. But if you are looking for real world experience on using it to record and track things and then take those files and mix them elsewhere, that's what I've been doing quite a bit. I think we've done like 5 or 6 finished songs or something like that, or finished jams, I should say, that have started on the Model 12. And it's really nice to just have a dedicated box that records this stuff and not have to worry about setting things up on a PC or anything like that and change environments. I think it's really valuable for your mindset to move projects from one thing to another, because I find that if I just stick to one environment, say one DAW, obviously there's a expedience to that, which is nice if you need to finish a project like that day, but when it comes to working on your own projects, I find it really valuable to be able to move environments from one thing to another. So this setup with the Model 12 has actually proven to be really amazing, and it just records to an SD card like so. And so far, it's been really reliable. There has been one instance where we did 28 minutes or so, or a half hour of recording, all the tracks being recorded, because we were doing several takes of a song, and then it hung for like 5 minutes. And I was like, uh-oh. After I hit stop recording, the little thing was like, I'm thinking, and it was thinking for, like I said, about 5 minutes, which made me really nervous. I was like, oh, do I have to just flip it on and off or something like that? After about 5 minutes, it came back online and worked again. So that's the only little hiccup that I've had in the past 3 months where I've suddenly been worried about the actual firmware being like buggy or something like that. Aside from that, I haven't had any issues with the firmware. And I do know Tascam has been updating the unit as well over the past couple of years, so that's nice that it is getting support. So, you know, firmware updates to fix any kind of potential bugs that might be in there. So overall, performance-wise, I feel like it's been really reliable. In terms of the actual features, you got preamps, and these preamps are great. Like I have some nice preamps that are technically better, but if I just had access to these preamps only, I would be perfectly fine with them. They're great. They're nice, clean, high gain type of preamps. You have a compressor as well after the preamp. As a big fan of compressors, it's extremely nice to have compression directly on board with a mixing unit. It's an okay compressor. You know, it doesn't wow me by any means, but it's also a one knob compressor, which you can't ask for much more of what it can do for that. So it gets some general compression duties done, which is really nice to have in such a small format right here. Also sounds great too. In fact, across the board, I wouldn't say anything sounds bad on the Model 12. I think it all sounds good. Does it sound exceptional? No, I wouldn't say it sounds exceptional, but I'm also used to high-end analog gear as well. That does sound exceptional. And also, this is technically a digital mixer. I believe the 16 and the 24 have analog summing in them, whereas the Model 12 is digital after it hits the inputs, essentially. It becomes a digital board at that point, even though they look the same. Which I don't personally mind if something's digital versus analog and all that. Like, as long as it sounds good, then I'm good to go. And also understanding that digital, usually you have a certain headroom that you have access to, and then after that, it's basically not useful anymore. Whereas analog, sometimes you can push things into the red zone a bit and get some nice distortion. As far as I'm aware, with the digital side of this board, I don't think there's any kind of like modeling sweet spot for the analog type of stuff that's inside of it. So anyways, back to the features of the board. It's nice that there is a sweepable mid EQ. You know, you have your high EQ and then you have your low EQ, 80 Hertz, 10K, and then the sweepable in the middle to kind of dial in some tones here and there. This EQ isn't gonna like fix a bunch of problems or anything like that. It's for general sweetening of the tracks. If there is one particular tone that maybe is peaking out too much, or if you need to bring out some intelligibility in a voice, or like the guitar needs a bit more bite in the 2K range or something like that, then you could dial that in relatively well with this board. But again, if you're used to a DAW, you're going to be like, pretty limited. Moving on from the EQ, we got 2 auxiliary sends, and the second one is dedicated to the effects. The effects are nice. It's another one of these things where they're not bad, they're also not fantastic, at least in my opinion. I would definitely opt for different effects for final mixdowns. When I just want to hear something, like using the reverbs on this has been really nice to just dial in some verb real quick to be able to test something. Like for instance, Modular gear. I've used this with Modular and I wanted to add some reverb to stuff real quick. This is fantastic having that on there. So I can just dial in some reverb, be good to go for the jam session. Not that it prints to the card with the reverb on each channel. They're still dry. We'll get more to that in a bit. Yeah, so the second auxiliary send is your effects channel. The other auxiliary send, it can be used for, additional monitoring out or something like that. One thing that this unit does not have, and I don't think the 16 and the 24 either have these, is stereo effects returns. So that means that if you do want to use something like, a pair of Strymon pedals or something like that, or a microcosm, you're gonna have to use a stereo input for those returns on your effects, which is unfortunate because this is technically already limited at basically only 10 inputs. You have 6 mono inputs and then 2 stereo inputs. At first, you might think, oh, that's a lot, but in reality, once you start adding effects and a few other instruments, especially stereo instruments, this gets chewed up really fast. So having no stereo effects return means that you are going to just suddenly be using up even more tracks on there if you do want to record external effects into this board. Moving on from auxiliary sends, obviously you got your pans, the usual balance pan type of stuff. You got your record buttons to arm recording. You got your faders. The faders feel nice as well. Like good, decent faders. Then you have switches for main mix, submix, and soloing. Definitely handy to have the option of a submix so you can have alternate outputs of stuff. Voiceover Tefty here. I forgot to mention in this video that there is a Q-Mix PFL type of setup that you can do with the Model 12. It has to do with the solo buttons, so any of those that are engaged, those channels will then be sent to the headphones and the volume will be adjusted with the PFL AFL master knob right there. So adjust that master knob to be able to hear them in the headphones and you're good to go. Cue up things in a mix before you send it out to the mains. Which is honestly a big selling point. If you're a gigging musician and you want something to multi-track and record your performances live, the Model 12 is fantastic because one of the benefits of it being the 12 version is relatively small footprint. I mean, you could see the MPC one is obviously smaller, but not that much smaller. And it's, it's got some weight to it, but it's not like super, super heavy. Adding this to your kit for a mobile setup, I think would actually be pretty smart, is assuming that it doesn't fail. And again, I've had it for 3 months. I've definitely been using it and putting it through its paces, but I haven't had it for a year and I haven't gigged with it. So those things could definitely reveal some problems, possibly. So like I said, 6 mono inputs and then 2 stereo inputs, which is great. Nice little compact setup right there. And then you got your master type of stuff. You got your effects return that's inside the box that you can't patch into, but you do have a fader for the effects right here. And you also have your sub mix, main mix, all that stuff. One thing that's really awesome is you have a Bluetooth pairing on here. And initially I was like, but then I hooked it up to my phone or iPad and I realized that I can actually plug this guy, the Model 12, into the MPC and then route Bluetooth audio from my phone into channel 910 on the MPC. I don't know how often I would use that particularly, but if I wanted to sample something like if I was sampling a YouTube video or granular synth or something coming off the iPad, then I can Bluetooth that directly into channel 910. Obviously it's going to introduce some latency, so you do have to deal with that, but you can Bluetooth that into channel 910 and then you go on the sampler and then on input 910 on the sampler on MPC, it will pop up on there, which is really, really cool. You do have to have it in live mode right there in order to get access to that if you have Bluetooth on at the moment. And obviously you have a little switch right here to switch on and off, or switch it to 910 or off or into the main mix. So it's nice that you don't have to technically take up channel 910 if you just wanted to play some Bluetooth audio from your phone, like during a live gig or something like that. So I think that's a really nice feature right there. And again, it's really cool that you can have that be sent to the computer or an MPC that's hooked up to the Model 12. And let's talk about that. MPC integration. This is arguably one of the best units for hooking up to an MPC. Obviously there's others, you know, the zooms and all that. I really appreciate the features that you get with the Tascam mixed into an MPC setup. And I've used it with the Live 2 and obviously the MPC 1. There is some caveats, you know, it does introduce a bit of latency. So if you're really particular, you know, like 8 to 10 milliseconds, if you're a drummer or if you need things to be absolutely locked in, then it can introduce enough latency that could be a problem. Others could have absolutely no problem with it at all. So it's definitely not a deal breaker by any means. And it does open up the option of being able to send all the outputs of an MPC-1 or Live and all that into all of the inputs or channels on the Tascam. The one caveat though, when you're in audio interface mode with the Tascam Model 12, is that outputs 1 and 2 on the MPC or computer and all that are always dedicated to channel inputs 1 and 2, or channel strip 1 and 2, when you put it onto PC mode. The way I've always used mixers that are this small is I've always put vocals on channel 1 and then guitar or bass and all that on channel 2, 3, etc. That does not work in this type of setup because you always need channel 1 and 2 to be your general output of whatever device you're hooked up to. So if I hook up the Model 12 to the iPad, channel 1 and 2 is going to be the dedicated output for whatever application I open up on the iPad and want to just play audio. Now, obviously not a big deal because I can just repatch things to different input strips and all that. But it would have been nice if there was some sort of way to configure like the main out to one of the stereo strips, channel strips right here. Because now I'm using 2 mono inputs to dedicate to a stereo output from the computer or the MPC or the iPad, which would have been nice to just have one channel strip dedicated to that type of stuff. Now, with an MPC, obviously I can tell it the main outputs I can just switch over to 7 or 8 or 9, 10. So on the MPC side of things, not that big of a deal. I just have to make sure that every new project, I go in and change the outputs for whatever device I'm using. So plug in 001 and have to make sure it's going to output 7, 8. So a little bit of a gotcha right there. You know, again, if you hook it up to something like an iPad, I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to just suddenly route the main outs to whatever channel strips on here. It's always going to be output 1 and 2 in there. Not a big deal, but just saying. So in terms of the Model 12 specifically with the MPC, it's obviously a very awesome integration right there. However, I do find the track count limiting on the Model 12. And that is because if you take into consideration stereo outputs, that means that you only have 5 possible stereo outputs for the Tascam Model 12. If you don't care about splitting out your outputs from the MPC, or if you just like throw your drums onto one stereo output and throw your tonal instruments on another stereo output, you're still taking up 2 on here. You can take up the 7, 8 and the 9, 10, which isn't bad. You know, that leaves 6 mono inputs for you, or it's 6 mono tracks for other instruments. But if you're using stereo output synthesizers, like say the Pro 3 or the Analog 4 or the Summit, or you know, whichever, those are all gonna take stereo channels, which means that you have to pan left to right for 5, 6, pan 3, 4, and all that to have that. So it would be like Pro 3, Summit, and then I'm down to the last 2 channel strips right there. Unless, of course, you opt for a mono input with your synthesizers and just ignore kind of stereo imaging from any kind of effects. That's a possibility too. The reason why I bring this up is because I have run into this issue several times so far. In fact, I'm usually juggling what I'm gonna patch in or what kind of stuff I wanna have sampled coming out of the MPC. Sometimes it's nice to have limits like that to say, hey, you can't have all that stuff hooked up, you gotta pick them. In that way, it's kind of nice. But there has been times where I wish I had 2 to 6 more inputs. I guess the reason why I bring this up is if you are thinking about the 12, the 24, the Model 24 is $1,100 new, and this is $600 new. So that's a considerable increase for sure. But if you are planning on investing in a dedicated mixer for your setup and it isn't gonna move too often, then I think saving up for the bigger model, whether it be 16 or 24, could actually be quite more beneficial to you, so long as you're not interested in the DAW surface controller aspects of it. Oh, look at that. It's time to subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the like button. Moving on from the MPC integration side of things, I have found that Eurorack is fantastic for the Model 12, or these type of mixers in general. It's just nice having a bunch of inputs available that will individually multi-track for your Eurorack projects. And paired with an MPC, you know, don't even have to be running in audio interface mode. You can just take the left right out for say drums or something like that into say 910, and then inputs 1 through 8 can all be Eurorack essentially, which is great. For us, what we did, obviously Memes was vocals on channel 1, and then I had the Model D on channel 2, and then Eurorack on 3, 4, 5, and I think like maybe 7, 8 or something like that. And then MPC stuff was coming out onto 910. And if I had something that was sampled on there, then I might have switched it around a little bit and done 7, 8 for the sampled stuff on the MPC, and then basically 3, 4, 5, 6 was all Eurorack inputs. So that is a excellent way to interface with your Eurorack gear. So if you have a big modular rig and you want to be able to multi-track stuff so you can kind of get into the nitty-gritty and like, you know, mix things in a DAW later on, this is like just a fantastic setup for that, because you could put this off in a different corner, arm your tracks, do a production, do a jam, you know, it could be long form too. Like I said, I've done 30 minutes and it worked, and then be able to take that into a DAW. Really great, awesome workflow. So I do want to talk about some of the mixing potential involved with the Model 12, kind of like highlight some cans and cannots with this unit. One thing that you can do is record a mix down of everything that's happening. Or when you arm everything and you're also recording, it also tracks the mix as well. It ends up being channel 11 and 12, and that's like the main bus essentially that gets tracked onto the SD card as well. So that allows you to reference it when you put it in a computer for how you want to do another mix, or you can actually just take those files right there and do like a straight mix down right there, or like a master from it. If you want to capture fader movements and EQ and all that stuff that happens in the form of a mix, you do have to do it live and repeat it every time if you screwed up and need to do it again. So there's no automation that's captured in this. So from a mixing point of view, it's like, it's one and done. You got to get it right the first time, and then that's your mix technically, which actually I do like. It feels relatively organic in that sense, like your fader movements that are happening are human feel, they have a humanistic feel to them. So I think that's a cool approach personally, but how I've been using it is taking the tracks directly out of the SD card, putting them in the computer, using those in Ableton and doing a mix. So if you're looking for this to be your main mix down tool to create your masters, you will be able to get there like 90% of the way, but the last 10% you're still gonna have to use some sort of software to do like a master, you know, to get it to like mastered levels for release, if that's what you're looking for. And you do have to understand the limitations of what's available in the mix itself. You can definitely do fader movements, and you can do some EQ and all that stuff, and the effects will be captured in the main mix, but you'll have to repeat those every time if you need to redo your mix. If you're just like capturing ideas, or if you're capturing band rehearsals or stuff like that, no problem. Like, you don't even need to worry about that stuff. But if you're gonna do some complex mixes, I think you're gonna hit a roadblock pretty fast, and that might be like a challenge for you. You might like the challenge of trying to get as much complexity going in a mix as possible. That's memory. For me personally, you know, like I said, I like going from one environment for recording and then to another environment for finishing. That's actually one of my I really enjoy that in the recording process. So definitely keep in mind, when you do pull the files off the card, you are going to have just the raw file out of there. So overall, I think the Model 12 is fantastic, and I highly recommend it if you need a small mixer to grab some recordings, like if you're going on a road trip, if you're doing some gigging, or if you want some like a small setup in a different part of your studio or something like that, and it needs to be disconnected from everything else. I think the Model 12 fits that really well. It's fantastic. If you're looking to get your first audio interface or your first mixer for your environment, I think I would look at the 16 or the 24 instead. Again, the price jump from the 12 to the 24 is an extra $500, you know, $1,100. You could technically grow out of the Model 12 pretty quickly if you decide to get some extra pieces. Or even if you hook it up to an MPC, you only have 5 stereo outputs available with an MPC if you're going to go that route for then, you know, sending mixes somewhere else. Personally, I think the 16 or the 24 is a better choice if you have a more dedicated studio setup, or if you're looking to do a more dedicated studio setup. So that's my recommendation right there. But if you're looking to like just have a nice small setup, like if you know you're only gonna have 1 or 2 synths and like a drum machine, and then you might have vocals or something like that, Model 12 fits that perfectly. And if you're doing some gigging, Model 12 is great. Unless you're a full band, then I think the 16 is probably better if you're a full band. But to set this up, do some tracking, and have your mix tapping on this with a few pieces of gear that you'd travel with as a gig setup. I think that's really great. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Model 12, and hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, all that stuff. It helps with the YouTube algorithm, you know, gets it going and recommends content and all that. And we definitely appreciate all the support that's been happening on the channel. And if you want to check out stuff that we've done with the Model 12, there will be a playlist that you can click on and hear stuff and listen to things that we've done with it. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Deuces.